Huxley, his friend colleague. And Huxley was known as Darwin's bulldog. This is what he said in Emancipation, Black and White in 1865. And this is referencing Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation a couple of years earlier. He said, "It may be quite true that some Negroes are better than some white men, but no rational man, cognizant of the facts, believes that the average Negro is equal, still less the superior of the white man." This is what Stephen Jay Gould, the Harvard biologist and famous evolutionist, said about the subject of racism and evolution. Biological arguments for racism may have been common before 1850, but they increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of evolutionary theory. Charles Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, was the pioneer in the study called eugenics, which means good genes. This is a study of human-engineered evolution, whose goal is to eliminate the weaker elements of the human race so that they would not populate the world. There were others, like Adolf Hitler, who appreciated very much Charles Darwin and Francis Galton's views and totally believed that the way to improve the human race was to get rid of the inferior races of the world. And we certainly know where that thinking sadly led. This enduring image of evolution goes back all the way to, well, it should go back to a picture of the primordial soup at the far left, but supposedly this is how we evolved into where we are today, according to the standard model of evolution. The Scopes trial succeeded in bringing these kinds of images and issues to the heartland of America. Let's look at how the debate on human origins developed historically here. So this next 10 minutes is a video that discusses some of the Scopes trial and the ramifications of it.
Today we are in Dayton, Tennessee, in a courthouse where a very famous trial took place nearly 100 years ago. And it all had to do with the great question of where did humankind come from? We had evolution presented, we had special creation presented. And those opposing opinions were clearly the focus for that trial. In America, we're still talking about that today. Where did man come from?
The Scopes monkey trial is an interesting experience, event in American history. Probably has been distorted a great deal, especially in things like the movie Inherit the Wind. But what I think happened there was the evolutionary side was presented publicly, not scandalously, which it might have been considered previously. But it was given an airing. It is said that ideas start out first as a heresy, and then with acceptance, and then finally everybody knew it all the time. The stages and acceptance of the theory. But in order to reach that, it first has to be aired out. And I think the Scopes trial probably gave the evolutionary viewpoint the publicity that eventually resulted in its acceptance.
Long-term effects of the Scopes trial are big, much bigger than you might expect for a trial that a lot of people have never even heard of. The initial change is really not much. There's sort of a drawback away from the anti-evolution crusade of the 20s. So when the ACLU took the case of Scopes to the Tennessee Supreme Court, the Supreme Court overruled it on a technicality because of the judge setting the fine instead of the jury, which was supposed to happen. And so the Tennessee Supreme Court made it clear, we don't want to see any more of these cases. And so that was the end of that. And the culture of sort of conservative Protestant Christianity, they turned more towards liquor and the anti-prohibition crusades of the 20s. And so it was largely, in some sense, forgotten. At the same time, the textbook publishers decided that evolution was a hot-button issue that they really didn't want to mess with. They did not want to risk some sort of big campaign that got their textbooks dropped, because they made a lot of money selling textbooks. So they decided the best thing to do was to simply, as much as they could, excise references to evolution from their textbooks. In the meantime, over in the world of science, you have the birth of what is now known as the neo-Darwinian synthesis. So the difficulty with Darwin's origin was that he really didn't understand how inheritance worked. And no one did. It wasn't really until the turn of the 20th century that people began to rediscover and uncover the principles of genetics that govern how traits are passed along. And it took another 30 years before statisticians came along and started working out what that would mean in populations over time, and how natural selection could actually work in those circumstances. And that birthed what we call the neo-Darwinian synthesis, which then took time to work its way through the scientific world. And then, once it was finally generally accepted by the scientific world, then the scientists sort of looked around and said, we've all come to a conclusion about evolution, but it's not in the textbooks. The textbooks don't even mention evolution, which was crazy. So at the Darwin Centennial at the University of Chicago in 1959, the call came out that we need to change our textbooks. It just needs to happen. And so along comes the 1960s, and the textbooks do a complete 180. Instead of not mentioning evolution at all, they go to make evolution the unifying theme of biology, and including the outrageous claims like Dobzhansky's "nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." So parents who grew up in the 40s and 50s learned biology from textbooks that barely mentioned evolution, now had kids coming home telling them that, well, nobody believes in creation anymore, and everybody thinks evolution is true, and it's just obvious. So there was a bit of a cultural crisis, you might say. At the same time, you have Henry Morris and James Whitcomb working on the Genesis flood, which comes out in 1961 and becomes, in a very real sense, sort of the rallying point for the reaction to evolution. They provided an alternative way to understand the fossil record, to understand what fossils were, to understand comparative anatomy, and all the stuff that goes into evolution. It gets wrapped into Whitcomb and Morris's ideas in their book. So it's a recipe for confrontation, right? You have a public that is generally ignorant of evolution, didn't know anything about it. You have a scientific world who's decided this is evolution, this is how it works, and you need to learn it, so we're going to put it in the textbooks. And then you have the creationist, the Genesis flood from Whitcomb and Morris, that becomes this rallying cry, rallying point. And so, of course, there's going to be conflict. So in the 70s, you have the beginnings of the trials. In the 80s, you have the Arkansas trial and the Louisiana trial, where creation is basically ruled out of the courtroom. And it's a really weird circumstance, because in the Scopes trial, Darrow and the defense were arguing for equal access of creation and evolution so that the kids could make up their own mind, where Brian is trying to kick them out and keep only creation in the classroom. In the 80s, the trials were basically reversed. The evolutionists were working to kick out creation from the classrooms. The creationists were arguing for equal time and equal treatment. Very bizarre history. There it is. I mean, that's in a nutshell the long-term impact of what the Scopes trial brought to us.
Well, the biblical view of origin is so exciting. It's so wonderful. And it's so logical and beautiful. God did it in 6 days, and it specifies what he did on each day. And at the end of many of what he did on each day, it says, and it was so. I love it. It was so. God knows that we kind of may doubt and wonder. And it reminds me of John 14, verse 2, where it says, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. So I think we can put right back down there in the Bible, every time it says, and it was so, we can add, parentheses, if it were not so, I would have told you. And think about this, when he made us in his image, what beauty and value that does to the human being. And we should treat one another, and we should act like the image of God.
When it comes to educating our young people on questions of origins, I do think it's important to present both views. They need to have a strong foundation in the Bible and creation science. But they also need to know at least the basics of what are being taught in the public sector from evolutionists. Because once they get outside of the church and they hear some outside opinions or data, and they have no way to compare that to what they've been taught, that can start to erode their faith. Not only in what they've been taught, but everything, their foundation. So I think they need to be prepared for what they're going to encounter in the secular world. And there's some great books available, lots of great resources for how to teach both sides. So the debate continues. It was not settled in this courtroom nearly 100 years ago. It's still going on today. But for more information, let's now take a look away from science and take a look at God's Word and see what good news we can find out about human origins there.
When we look at this world, we see the evidence of incredible complexity. Look at all the animals, the birds, the fish, the beauty, the variety, the complexity, the precision. It's all there. And if we have our wits about us, we can just stand back and gaze and wonder at the marvelous world that we see. But where does man in all this? Is man simply another animal, as popular science actually believes? Or is there something special about him? According to Genesis, God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." God created man according to the biblical story in Genesis, and he created him as a fellowship, as God is a fellowship. And the Lord God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him." So Adam gave names to all cattle, to the birds of the air, to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper comparable to him. The animals he saw came 2 by 2. He saw the lion with his big mane and the lioness with not so large a mane. He saw the peacock and saw the peahen, which are quite different looking. He saw that the animal genders had some different looks, and they were 2 by 2, but there was nothing for Adam. Then the day came when he was introduced to someone more similar. Then the rib which the Lord had taken from man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to man. Here we have a picture of Jesus as our Creator, bringing to Adam a woman, a companion, Eve. There's something very interesting about this in the original Hebrew tongue. And Adam said,